Welcome to another episode of Flashback, Tracks from the Past, the show that takes you back to the golden age of the tracked music scene.
I've been a fan of legendary game series Fallout that began in 1995, and when Fallout 3 came out I was skeptical to the whole radio station in the wasteland thing. But Freedog and President Eden made a convert out of me, and I just had to create a radio station that went live from a bunker myself. Well, it didn't really work out the way I expected, and here's my story. Crimson, compulsive march. In the 20th century, war was waged over the will of and love from the people, with the hope of ensured victory in elections, wars, and public opinion. Only this time, the spoils of war were also its weapons: newspaper and radio. For control over these resources, Hitler invaded Poland and took control of the Gleiwitz transmitter, and Stalin seized the press in Russia. In 2008, the storm of World War had come again. Bethesda released the computer game Fallout 3, and most of the fanbase dissolved into quarreling, bickering groups on forums bent on sharing their hurt feelings. Some of us played the game and enjoyed hearing the voices from the two radio hosts that were still in the air in the destroyed city of Washington, D.C. I was one of them. My life was about to change. Mannen bak skuret. And that's Travolta, by the way, playing it for Coreus from our Discord forum, who requested it. I've loved in-game radio since I played Grand Theft Auto 3 in the noughties. I actually pulled out the audio files from the stations and listened to them in the bathtub at my home. Yeah, right. But I was not a fan of the radio stations in Fallout 3, thinking, what the heck? They barely have power to begin with. How will they broadcast? But we had enigmatic President Eden and his USA revival shtick, and Free Dog, the larger-than-life shock jock sending his snarky comments on your progress. Both an enjoyable experience. It's 40 FTS and Winter with Airborne version 2. With Fallout Vegas coming out in 2010, radio stations were still a thing in the wasteland. But since then, the fan-made stations really have become very popular. Remarkably well done, some with playable situations where you could meet the DJs and do quests for them. I have a large collection of those stations actually. They often even surpass the ones you get with the game, and after you install them you can enjoy listening to music and banter as you walk through the desert. Radio never changes. Dizzy and Water, Forest Hymn. All the best Fallout DJs have been really eccentric in their own way. The fans created even more weird people. Isaiah Pendergrass from Cadillac Jack's Radio Shack, yeah, he gets more hammered over time. You know, I've been in community broadcasting for 11 years here in Sweden, and I can tell you we had people like that in real life. In Repcon Radio, Captain Cosmos is in a constant dispute with his evolved moon monkey, Jangles. The latter is so snarky he puts all the other DJs to shame. Gopnik Radio has a Russian guy telling you survival advice and to drink as much alcohol as you can. Well, there is little wholesomeness in the desert, let me tell you that much. Trigger, Moonchild M72. My own Fallout style, if you want to, radio station. Yeah, it was supposed to have a 40-year-old man, now living in his mother's basement, which he made into a bunker. From the description I made for him, like a soldier living in the jungle, Daemon has yet to receive news that the war is over. Vaguely aware of the times around him, but still nurturing a feud with the other now non-existent Atari users, he can't understand why the internet thing is so popular. He frequents the last remaining BBSs in the world and refuses to trade his terminal window for some newfangled stuff like Windows crap. Yeah, I actually intended to voice act the station. Thankfully, I was wise enough not to. Aerobic Workout 79. So, why no voice acting? Easy. How would you know that it was just a show when you have no references and no context? Most people would have written me off as crazy. Look, I'm not saying I'm not, but it's better not to make it painfully obvious. So it never came to be, and all for the better if you ask me, as listeners stop listening for any little mistake. 5 seconds of silence, bye-bye. You said something snarky, I'm never coming back. That song sucked, man. Let's call it for it is. Nah, too lazy. Let's change the station instead. I don't like your voice. I'm only gonna do Spotify playlists from here on. Human voices bore me. So, Wallow, Bambi. I'm more of a Bambi versus Godzilla guy, honestly. Anyway, as we are getting closer to 1 year on the air, it's been quite a ride, that's all I'm saying. I thought I knew radio. I did not. I still don't, but at least I'm getting there. A huge thanks to all of you sticking with me through power failures, crashes, mistakes, and weird tunes that shouldn't have been put on the air to begin with. I'm gonna play the greatest tunes, no matter how much it hurts. Maybe I shouldn't paraphrase Free Dog with that logic. Anyways. Converse and April. Since the first day I heard Laszlo talking about things and actually having a lot of grief of the stupid callers that called his show in Grand Theft Auto 3, I have really been amazed by computer games having radio stations. And yeah, I spoke about GTA, but other games followed suit, and yeah, it's a popular thing right now. For some games it fits perfect, and with others it feels like, shoehorned. Serious, a pretty bad dream. Ah yes, a bad dream you want to wake up from, but you can't. Computer games are easier. When you kinda grow tired with them, you just turn them off and reality comes back on again. And in reality, radio stations are seldom as funny as they are in those computer games, right? But it's hard, as I said, to really make an interesting voice or character and still have people believe that's not who you are. So I think I'm gonna stop my dreams of voice acting. I think I'm a pretty good DJ playing the music. Jaron Tell of Wave, Burned Beyond. And we actually have another one by Mr. Tell. You're gonna hear it in a while here. It sounds pretty similar, but it's not the same song. He made them as a set, so of course we shall play them as one. Or at least I think he made them as a set. Anyway, doesn't matter. You're listening to Flashback Tracks from the Past with your host DJ Daemon, and we shall continue throughout the summer giving you interesting little stories every Saturday at 9 p.m. Swedish time, Central European time. And if you want to listen to the podcast, we are on Spotify, we are on iTunes, and you can reach us at ericade.radio. Malmen and Goluigi, Summertime Roses. There is an old saying, spread the word, not the disc. I don't think anyone is using diskettes anymore, but hey, if you do, well, you can spread the Arcade Radio Network on a billion little diskettes, which is probably what it would take if you were to kind of get a whole day's show onto them in wave format. Anyway, we're going on with Gerontel again. Yeah, the other part of what I believe is a set. Tell of Wave, Flexible Feelings. So podcasts are basically radio, right? And radio is super fun. A little bit of a radio fact actually. Last year, in August 2020, it was 100 years since the first commercial broadcast. That kind of puts things into perspective, right? 100 years ago, we had Spanish flu, now we have COVID-19. And back then, we just found out that radio is kind of cool, and right now, we are evolving radio, TV, and everything into a big pot of something. I don't know what's gonna come out on the other side, because those developments never really changes. But whatever journey it has been, it's been an amazing one. DJ Uno and Headbanger, Freezed Fantasies. And it's supposed to be Frozen Fantasies, but I'm not the only one. Well, manhandling the language. I'm sorry. It's a second language to me, and it's treated that way. Anyway, Fallout, I have many very, very hot and warm memories of that fantastic game series. The original games are still the best, but I think Bethesda have done a pretty decent job of maintaining Fallout. Yeah, okay, I know about Fallout 76, but I have never played that game, and I can tell you one thing, I never ever will. But still, I hope more Fallout to come. I hope Fallout 5. I really hope that comes out soon. Rise Cup. Night speaks to a woman, and I wonder what it says. Does it sound like Batman? I am the night. Actually, that seems like some kind of weird British English there. Even when I try to sound American, it just doesn't work. Anyway, this is DJ Daemon broadcasting over your podcast player. And thank you for listening. And remember, next Saturday at 9 p.m. Swedish time, Central European time, I will be back. We are leading you into the good night. by playing Melody of Shadow, Disc Trip, and Neoblaze, Vision of Space.